I hope you're doing well. Today I'd like to go over the Trojan War with you and Homer's Iliad. This epic story has love, betrayal, war, really everything. And history-making leaders like Alexander the Great used to sleep with this under their pillow in order to inspire them to be like the Greek warrior Achilles and Odysseus. So we're going to have a large-scale overview, and I do recommend you read this one for yourself one day. So these stories survive because a Greek poet named Homer wrote them down roughly around 700 BC, and some historians argue back and forth whether or not he actually existed. He could be a possible semi-legendary figure. These stories really are oral traditions that were finally written down hundreds of years later that came from the Greek Dark Ages, where we don't have a lot of historical evidence or really no historical writing. So before we get into this story, we really have to understand how the ancient Greeks viewed honor and glory. So ancient Greeks were at times unsure where they were going in the afterlife, and where you went in the afterlife really depended on the honor and glory that you achieved in this life. So you would do things like be a great artist, a great poet, or a great warrior in order to impress the gods and higher your standing in the afterlife. You also wanted to earn a name for yourself that would survive on this earth. They believed that an element of your spirit or of your essence would really be connected to that name. If people still remembered your great deeds and achievements, that it was like you also lived on with your name. Similar to a way that a band who died a long time ago still has their music around, is still influencing the world. That essence of who they were still carries on and has influence in the world. They also believe that some aspect of their spirit lived on through their children and put a huge emphasis on family connections. So this story begins in media res, which translates to in the middle of things. And one of the reasons why epic poetry starts off in the middle of things is because the Trojan War would have been common knowledge to the people who were listening, so this would have just been an added story onto that basic knowledge. Also, it kind of gets right into the action. So our story begins 10 years into the Trojan War, where the Greeks are fighting against the Trojans and are having a hard time breaching their walls. But we are going to start from the beginning so we can understand the entire story. So this story truly begins with a wedding. All the gods were invited to the wedding of Achilles, the hero of this story's parents, Thetis and Peleus. So this wedding is taking place. All the deities are showing up, except for one who was not invited, and this goddess is the goddess Eris, who was the goddess of chaos, strife, and discord. So if there's any goddess you don't want showing up to your wedding, it's definitely the goddess of chaos and discord. However, you also do not want to make this goddess angry by not inviting her. So it is a lose-lose situation for Thetis and Peleus. So Eris hears of this wedding banquet that's supposed to take place without her, and she decides that she's going to show up anyways, and she's going to start a little trouble to get even. And she brings a golden apple, and she says this golden apple is a prize to the fairest and most beautiful goddess here. And she wholeheartedly knew that this would actually cause trouble. So the goddesses started arguing back and forth about who should receive this apple for being the fairest and most beautiful. And of course they go to Zeus to judge them so they can decide and this can be over with. And Zeus is reluctant to do so, knowing if he chooses one goddess, the other two will resent him and possibly take revenge against him. So he decides that he's not going to judge them, and he actually tells them to go to Paris, a mortal man who was actually a prince of the wealthy city Troy, in order to get their final decision. So Hermes takes the three goddesses down to earth in order to find Paris, and this is where they each offer Paris a bribe. Hera offers to make Paris the king of Europe and Asia. Athena offers him skills in battle and to be an amazing warrior. And then Aphrodite offers him the hand of Helen of Sparta, the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chooses Aphrodite's bride, and he says that she should be awarded the golden apple, and he is given Helen of Sparta, and now she is going to be Helen of Troy, a princess of the wealthy walled city. So Helen being given to Paris and leaving Sparta is what's going to unify the Greeks in order to attack Troy and try and get Helen back. When Helen was a young princess, all of the great kings of Greece wanted to marry her, and they sent her great gifts, and they tried to court her, and they actually started bickering back and forth with the other kings, trying to marry Helen. And what they decided to do to prevent war was to cast lots, or essentially flip a coin, pretty much, in order to decide which king would finally marry Helen. They also swore an oath to protect that king and Helen, to make sure that no one would try to steal Helen away from that king. And if someone did, every Greek city-state just about would go to war to restore Helen to King Menelaus, the king of Sparta, who won the lot. So when Helen is given by the goddess Aphrodite to Paris, this Greek alliance then launches 1,000 ships in order to get her back, and they are going to destroy the city of Troy and return Queen Helen to King Menelaus of Sparta. And this is where we get the famous term, the face that launched 1,000 ships. So Helen was so beautiful and so desired that Menelaus was willing to launch 1,000 ships in order to get her back. Note that the city of Troy was extremely wealthy and was known as a massive fortress with huge walls that was easy to defend and extremely hard to attack. So this war is actually raging for roughly 10 years by the time Homer starts narrating the Iliad. And on one side you have the Achaeans, also known really as Mycenaeans, and you have their two heroes, Achilles and Odysseus. There are other kings that are in charge of leading this war, however, the story really focuses on these two. On the other side, the Trojans, you have King Priam, who's king of the city, and you have his favorite firstborn son, Hector, who was a great warrior and hero of Troy, his younger brother Paris, of course, who was promised Helen, and now Helen is a princess of Troy. So the hero of our story is the great warrior Achilles, and Achilles is the son of Thetis and Peleus. And when he was a young child, a baby, he was dipped in the river Styx. The river Styx is the river that separates the world of the living and the world of the dead, and because his mother was a sea nymph, when he was dipped in the river, that made him invulnerable. So he could not be harmed except for one area, the small portion of the foot where he was being held as he was dipped into the river Styx. That is the only spot where he could be hurt. So the Achilles tendon is actually named after this story, and the term Achilles heel refers to a person's weakness, the one thing that can bring them down. So during the war, Achilles fell in love with a woman named Briseis. Briseis was a member of King Priam's family, and Achilles had conquered lots of land in Troy, and he took her as his slave, and the two fell in love. Agamemnon decided that he was going to show Achilles who was truly the ruler of the expedition, and he took her as his slave. Achilles was so outraged by this, he decided that he was actually going to sit out the war. And when the hero of the Greeks left the war, the Greeks actually start to lose the war, and the Trojans start gaining ground again. So Achilles' right-hand man, best friend, brother-in-arms, Patroclus, decides that he does not want to allow the Greeks to lose, and he actually convinces Achilles to let him wear his armor. The Greeks believed that Achilles was returning to battle. They saw his armor, they saw someone that looked just like him, and they were inspired and won a major victory over the Trojans. However, during this battle, the hero of Troy, Hector, son of King Priam, cuts down Patroclus in battle, thinking that it was the hero Achilles. The body is returned to Achilles, and he is outraged and goes into deep mourning, and decides that he is going to get revenge and rejoins the fight. The tide of the war continues to turn in favor of the Greeks with the return of Achilles. Achilles, looking to avenge the death of his good friend Patroclus, challenged Hector to one-on-one combat before the gods and before all the great kings of Greece and Troy. After a brutal, hard-fought battle between the two heroes of the war, Hector is cut down and Achilles wins the day. Achilles was so emotionally enraged with the loss of his friend Patroclus that he takes it out on Hector even after he killed him in battle. What he does is he ties Hector's lifeless body to the back of his chariot, and then he parades it around the walls of the city several times in front of his own father, King Priam of Troy, who looked on helplessly. This act was extremely terrifying to the Greeks and to the Trojans. They were supposed to honor the dead. Even after a major battle, both sides would allow time for each side to collect their dead and have burial rites. So when he disgraced the body of Hector, that was not just destroying him physically, it was also destroying him spiritually. He really needed time to have the proper rituals to cleanse the body, to put coins on the eyes or on the tongue for the boatman in order to rest in the afterlife. The story actually ends with King Priam of Troy sneaking into the tent of Achilles in the middle of the night. King Priam actually begs Achilles to return the body of his son and to allow the proper funeral ceremonies to take place so that he could rest in the afterlife. Achilles, possibly realizing that he had gone too far and having avenged his good friend Patroclus, allows Priam to take the body of his son and allows the funeral rites to exist. And the story ends with the funeral procession of the hero Hector in Troy. This is where the Iliad ends, though most people know what comes next just from common knowledge, which is the story of the Trojan horse, which will be another video for another time. Thank you for watching.